Hello everyone, Kristina here. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through my April 2025 release at Concord9th.com. My line is Kristina Werner with Concord 9th, and I do stamps, dies, and stencils. So let's get into it for April 2025. Like I've shown in previous videos, you're going to see the products used like intermixed with each other, but I will kind of I'll show you the product and then I will show you all of the cards that feature that product. You're going to see cards pop up multiple times because I used multiple products on each card. So let's get going here. The Long Line Leaves bundle includes 4 different products. You have a background stamp with the large leaf design. You also have a 6x8 stamp set, and I've obviously used this stamp. It's well loved. You'll see it on quite a few different projects. This is a 6x8 stamp, and you've got the 2 kind of outline leaves, 2 smaller solid leaves, and then a bunch of little texture elements that you can add to your cards. In the die set that coordinates, it cuts out the 2 smaller solid leaves, plus there are 4 like really intricate greetings, as well as the outer shadow layer. And then we have a stencil set. Now this is a 6x6 stencil set. There are 6 stencils, and you're going to be able to do kind of a 2-tone leaf, like 2 different colors on both of the larger outline leaves, plus the full background. So I'm going to open this up and kind of show you the stencils because they're set up in a fun way. So the first, let's see, I've got these 2 right here. You put them together and it creates the really large leaf. You can stencil those all together. On this individual stencil, it is the smaller leaf. So you'll get it lined up like that. And then all you have to do is slide over and get the other leaves as well. And there are etch lines on there to help you line things up. So you've got the 2 larger outline leaves on the 6x8 stamp set. And then you have the 2 segments for the background stamp. So you have 2 different colors of leaves, but then also you have the full background design in case you wanted to do it all in one go. Now I did want to mention that when you use the stencils with the stamps, because the stamps are clear polymer material, sometimes the stamp can kind of stretch and warp either in manufacturing or when you remove it from the sheet when you're going to stamp. So I'm going to show you some footage on screen where I was using the stencils. They're really easy to use and they do match up with the stamps, but you will most likely need to move your stencil around as you're adding your ink to make sure that it lines up a little bit more precisely. It's not too hard to do. You can just slide that around and move it as you go. Okay, so let's look at some cards using this bundle. In this first card, I used the background stamp with the stencils as well as one of the die sentiments. So I cut the shadow outer die in gold, and then the greeting itself is in white. Here's a large 5x7 card where I used the outline stamps from the 6x8 stamp set, and I stamped it over a paper pieced background of cardstock. I just did cardstock strips and then stamped and heat embossed on top. Paired that with a nice stacked greeting from the dies. This next one was really fun, and it features that texture stamp. I used the solid leaves to create a colorful kind of border on the left-hand side of the card. I then did gold heat embossing for all those little texture spots and finished it off with a die cut sentiment. The shadow layer was die cut out of white and the greeting out of gold. Okay, so these feature mostly just that bundle, but I did use these stamps, dies, and stencils on a bunch of other cards as well. So I'm going to show this to you now so you can spot them. I used the background stamp for this kind of tone-on-tone set in the background. This is actually Tide Pool cardstock, and I used Tide Pool ink for the stamping. And I just stamped it multiple times to make sure that it was nice and dark and would show up for that background. For this card, I did the really large stamp from the 6x8 stamp set, plus the stencils for kind of that two-tone ink blending, some darker leaves, some lighter leaves. Here's another with that background. This time I stamped on ballet slipper cardstock. So I started with a very pale pink cardstock, stamped the leaves. I think these were actually in the color Evergreen, and then ink blended some other green tones on top. Here's a card with the solid leaves and the die cut grading. I stamped these solid leaves and then used the coordinating dies to cut them out. For this card, I used the stencil that has the full design for the background, and I just did kind of a rainbow blending all the way up for the top portion of this 5x7 card. The stencil design itself does not stretch to 7 inches for a 5x7 card, so I did it just in this top section and added a band of white cardstock at the bottom. That's a great way to kind of stretch your smaller backgrounds for a 5x7 card. And one more card featuring this bundle. I used the smaller of the large outline stamps, did some stenciling for coloring in those leaves, and then I also stamped the texture little kind of spot stamp over the top. And then I used the die cut grading and I stacked it multiple times to give it a little bit of weight and a little bit of shadow when it's on the card. So this is the Long Line Leaves bundle. Lots of products included in this one. There's 4 products total. You can really stretch this bundle to a lot of different cards. The Mothers and Fathers bundle and the Spring Bloom Inlay dies are technically all separate products, but I wanted to show them to you together because I use them together on my card samples and they work extremely well in unison. So the Mothers and Fathers bundle includes a stamp set, a 4x6 stamp set, and the coordinating dies. So in the stamp set, you have 6 large greetings with a script font, and then you've got 2 smaller all cap greeting stamps, Happy Mother's Day and Happy Father's Day, as well as a smaller text, you know, for the inside of your cards, or you could even incorporate it on the front of your card. But my idea behind the stamp set is I wanted it to be for both mothers and fathers in your life, but also the people in your life that are like a father to you or like a mother to you. I think a lot of times we want to just send cards like that around Mother's and Father's Day to our loved ones, but we don't have the right sentiments to express that. So I wanted to include that specifically. I also have some more generic greetings that are more like everyday greetings, but also express that kind of, you know, appreciation for the special people in our lives. Okay, so in this stamp set, I've got all of those, and then the coordinating dies will cut everything out except the larger text greeting. I figure you're not going to be cutting that out. You might in a large rectangle or whatnot, but for the most part, you'd probably be stamping that on the inside of your card. So I did not include a die for that, but there's a die for everything else, including this large, you know, or this long, narrow strip that works for both Happy Mother's Day and Happy Father's Day. So in this whole section, I'm also including the Spring Bloom Inlay dies. This creates a single floral stem, and you have this large kind of base layer, and then you have the outline where you can do all the inlay with all the different colors of cardstock. So let's look at some cards using these products. First up is this really beautiful card where I created the Spring Bloom Inlay die with just a pink flower, and then I used a stamped greeting from the Mothers and Fathers stamp set. Using that flower once again, I went with all peaches and oranges. This is, you know, nectar, grapefruit, sorbet, and I also brought in down here at the bottom just a little bit of cayenne just to like get a little bit of a more intense border at the bottom. But really, really pretty using all those peach tones. This card is all about that gold outline. It almost looks like, you know, like wrapping paper or something. I think it's so pretty. So I cut out 5 of these flowers actually, and then, you know, when I cut off a segment here, I then moved whatever was left over to a different part of the background. So I really utilized every single piece of the flowers. And then I've got the sentiments from the Mothers and Fathers stamp set. Here's another card with that outline. I thought it would be really fun to have a colorful stripe segment and then have the floral just cut plainly and simply out of white on top. I also paired that with the Happy Mother's Day sentiment, heat embossed in white. Here's a really fun version of that flower. I use multiple different cardstocks for building the flower up here. I thought that would be really, really fun. And then I used a little bit of kind of like a yellow, a darker tone yellow right in the center. This flower is all about the blue tones. So I used juniper and tide pool for the leaves. I also used juniper right here, but the actual petals are out of powder. And I used a little bit of gold cardstock in the center for the flower itself. Down here is a gold heat embossed grading that I used the dies to cut out. I have a few more cards just showing use of the really small little Happy Mother's Day or Happy Father's Day stamps down here at the bottom. They're really great to kind of pair in on some cards. So this one just has the Happy Father's Day down here at the bottom. As a sub greeting, it works really well with the larger greetings from the Loved and Happy dies, pairing it with that for Happy Father's Day. And then we have this really simple one layer card with the Happy Father's Day in the center. And I just used a bunch of the stamped elements from Kristina's Finishing Touches stamp set. Okay, so this is the Spring Bloom Inlay dies and the Mothers and Fathers bundle. I cannot resist a large greeting on a card, so I designed the Loved and Happy dies. This is a very similar style to the die cut greeting that's included in the Love Day bundle. I wanted to use that same style. So you've got 3 greetings here. You are loved, thinking of you, and so happy for you. And let's get into some card examples so you can see how these look on cards. This first card has a stacked white greeting of the So Happy For You dies. I used kind of a monochromatic color scheme with a nectar card base and then, you know, all of these deeper tones on the leaf. I think it works really well for having a more quiet, not even quiet, but just an understated greeting that lets the rest of the design shine. Next up, I have this one with the You Are Loved. I love how the V kind of extends up into the A. And that, as a graphic designer, those little elements make me excited. I love that. So for this one, I did a white shadow layer for the die and then used gold on top. For this card with that pink background, I paired it with a stacked white greeting of the Thinking of You die. Did not do the shadow this time, I just let it be. So here's another Thinking of You. You can see how it pairs on top of a really bold background. And then here's a So Happy For You with that gold. I just have a little strip of gold cardstock going right behind it. Brings out all that shine. So this is the Loved and Happy dies. There are 3 greetings and 3 shadows, so 6 dies in total. The bold circles background stamp is exactly that. It's bold and it's circles and it's for all those fun backgrounds. So this is a really fun one to use. It's a great kind of simple geometric design that could be paired with a lot of different card styles. So here's a card I made using it. I basically, I ink blended the background with the different colors, and then I stamped the bold circles background stamp over top in those same colors. I applied the ink to a section of the stamp, stamped it, and then I applied more ink to a different section, stamped that, and then proceeded on in kind of a multicolor rainbow stamping technique. And it really paired up really well. And using almost those same exact colors for some vertical bands of cardstock, I discovered that the width of one of the columns of circles was about 7/8 of an inch. So I created a paper piece background of cardstock strips of 7/8 inch cardstock strips in different colors. And then I stamped on top in a clear embossing ink and then used clear embossing powder. So there is a little bit of some shine to that background. Then I paired that with a large greeting from the Loved and Happy die set. So this is the bold circles background stamp. Lots of fun with this one. I can't wait to incorporate it into some more cards. The Kristina's Finishing Touches bundle that comes out in April 2025 includes 2 products. I have the stamps and the stencils. Now, before I get too far into talking about this bundle, I do want to let you know that in May, we're going to be coming out with some dies. There will be dies, Kristina's Finishing Touches dies, with more of the little stitching elements and things like that. I did not include dies in this bundle at first because I wasn't sure if I needed them, and then realized, yeah, you do need some dies. So unfortunately, I couldn't fit them into this bundle for April, but we've got it in next month. So there will be an additional product coming out next month. But let's talk about the stencils and the stamps. So in the stencils, the stencils are 6x9, that really large size that we've all grown to love. And there are 3 stencils included. One has all just stitching lines, kind of really long stitching lines. And then the other 2 stencils fit with A7 and A2 cards. Open this up and take a look at these stencils so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. So this first one has all of those horizontal lines. You have a single dashed line or stitch line, a double stitch line. You have kind of a wonky little wavy one, and then one that has 4 of those lines all together. The next stencil in the set is this one. It's sized for an A7 card. You see this little etching on here? Might be a little bit hard to see in this lighting, but it says A7 card 5x7, and there's an etched line on the outer edge, so you can line up your card, and it's perfectly positioned for the dashed lines to be inked onto your card. So that's the second stencil, and the third one actually has 2 A2 cards on it. And one has the stitch line or dash line right at the edge, and then the other one has a little more inset. So it's a little bit smaller, but it'll help you get it completely centered onto your card just right. There we go. Now you can see the etching on the stencil. Okay, so those are the stencils. The stamp set, it's a 4x8 stamp set. So you have really, really long elements here. There's 3 stitching elements, and then there's a long solid line right here. There's a solid line for a bow down here. You'll recognize that same bow shape from my Gift Bows dies, one of my favorite die sets that came out last year. And then I have a bunch of little tiny elements. I realized that when I do cards, sometimes I just want a little tiny heart on it somewhere. And depending on the type of card and the style of design on it, I might want a really kind of stylized heart, or I might want one that's really skinny and, you know, more narrow, or one that's a little bit more chunky. Sometimes I need a different shaped heart. So there are some stars down here as well. We've got the more pointed stars. There's 3 sizes, and then there's one that's a little more rounded. I've also got some little circles and also some little pluses. I like to do these little plus signs so they look like little sparkles on things. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to include in this Finishing Touches stamp set. So let's go through all of the cards that I use this on, and you probably have seen all of them if you've seen any of my other cards for this release. I'm just going to point out where I used either the stencil or the stamps. Here's one that heavily uses the stamp set. I used all of those little elements stamped in different colors, and I also have that stitch line right across the center. For this card, I used one of the A2 card sections on the stencil, and when I put it on the card, I just omitted the sections where I already had my leaf stamp. So it's just along the outer edges, and it's not running into any of the image. On this card, I used the solid line, and I did that in gold embossing, and then I did the little bow stamp right over the top, just for a little bow segment. This one's really fun because I actually used a texture paste, or a grit paste. This is, I think it was white grit paste from Tim Holtz. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a raised edge on all those stitching lines. So basically what I did was I used the single dashed line on the stencil. I think I did the 2 running horizontally first and let that dry. And then I came back over and did this vertical one as well. And because the dash lines here were already applied and they were raised a little bit, I did have a little bit of a, you know, like it wanted to blob out because the stencil wasn't completely touching the cardstock. So right at these sections right here, I did end up having to clean up that grit paste just a tiny bit. But because the grit paste isn't super liquidy, I was able to kind of scrape it off the cardstock without it being a problem. So there's a little tip for you if you're going to be doing kind of these intersecting dash lines on your card. For this one in particular, I use the dash line stamps, and I just put that little dash line right on the edge of this section of cardstock. This one's a little bit hard to see because it is very subtle, but I used the kind of wonky dash line stamp right here along the bottom just for an added element. This one, I did that same kind of like curved dash line, and I stamped it in white pigment ink and then put white embossing powder on top and then heat set that. So you have some really nice intricate like little lines going back and forth. And then here's one more where I used the stencils. This time I stenciled on that curved edge right here at the bottom in some juniper ink. Actually, that may have been rainforest ink. I think it was rainforest ink. So this is the Kristina's Finishing Touches bundle. Once again, there is one more product that will come out next month, the dies, that will kind of round out this collection of products. I've heard over the years that many of you would like a more simple or easier way to add dash lines to your cards. So I hope this really helps you out. So here is the April 2025 release from Kristina Werner with Concord 9th. Everything is available now over at the concord9th.com shop. So I hope you'll check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in another video very soon.